everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and it's time to look at what happened at NXT TakeOver Chicago. TakeOver Chicago 2018 after last year's, and it was definitely an eventful show. So let's take a look at everything that went down. So after an eventful pre-show featuring Adam Cole and EC3 being their snarky heelish best on the pre-show panel, we moved into the main show proper and the first match, which was the NXT Tag Team Championship match between the Undisputed Era, represented by Kyle O'Reilly and Roderick Strong, against the team of Danny Burch and Oney Lorcan. This was, I think everyone who watched it will pretty much agree, a very, very good opener indeed. It was hard-hitting, it was fast, it was everything you'd expect from four kind of indie-style guys, I think it's fair to say, like the Undisputed Era, Lorcan and Burch. The heels were obviously their heelish, nasty self. Kyle O'Reilly was hilarious at times. He even did, his standard Hulk Hogan belt thing, walking down the ramp. Wasn't the only reference to Hulk Hogan we'd see in the whole show, but I'll get to that in a little bit. That reference in particular was very, very overt. So the match progressed. At one point, Oney Lorcan and Danny Burch looked like they had the match won, but then Adam Cole, who'd accompanied his teammates to ringside, got involved and dragged his partner out of the ring when he was about to be pinned. Dastardly heel tactics, but it's worth pointing out actually that the crowd were fully behind the Undisputed Era, despite their position as heels in the match. I guess we had a Chicago crowd who are often a little bit smarky, and well, very smarky, and also a TakeOver crowd, which are very smarky indeed. So when you combine the two, it's not a real surprise that the popular cool heels were cheered more than the baby faces. Eventually the Undisputed Era won, retaining their tag team titles, and despite Adam Cole getting involved earlier on, the finish itself was fairly clean. I think they hit a double team move and got the pinfall, and they move on to face British Strong Style on night one of the UK Championship tournament. I think that's a six-man tag actually, against Pete Dunne, Tyler Bate and Trent Seven, featuring three members of the Undisputed Era, who I assume will be Cole, O'Reilly and Roderick Strong as well. So after a wonderful opener, we moved into a match which I think was probably, I was about to say equal in quality, but I think I actually preferred it a little bit more than the opening tag match. Ricochet versus the Velveteen Dream. The big talking point here was that Ricochet came out dressed entirely as Hulk Hogan. He did the flexing, he did all the hulking up, the ear thing, and he ripped his t-shirt off at the start and he was wearing the big feathery red and yellow scarf. It was insane. It was crazy. And of course it will fuel further speculation that WWE are working towards bringing Hulk Hogan back in some capacity. This is going to pretty much set the internet alight with regards to Hulk Hogan's potential impending return. The match itself was very, very good indeed. Started off a little bit slowly, and the whole vibe wasn't one of a blood feud like later on, which we'd see in the case of Gargano and Ciampa. This was more two bitter rivals trying to embarrass each other, trying to prove that one was better than the other. There was an exchange of holds at the start. Ricochet was flipping out of everything. At one point, he did his backflip into his Superman pose in the middle of the ring, but Velveteen Dream met him with his sort of slinky, kind of mat-based taunt pose. It was very good. It was something we've seen alluded to in the feud, in the build-up to the match itself. So it was very good. I like callbacks. We'd see a lot of callbacks later on, of course. The match progressed and the moves got bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually it got a little bit sort of, I'm gonna call it a contest of distance almost. Both men took turns heading up to the top rope. At one point, basically, it started off Ricochet headed up to the top rope. Velveteen Dream rolled out of the way to a good halfway across the ring, maybe even more, and Ricochet launched into a phenomenal shooting star press right across the ring, nailed his opponent perfectly. It was wonderful, but Velveteen Dream did not take the pinfall. Then Dream gained control of the match, headed up top as well. Ricochet was right on the other side of the ring, and Dream launched into kind of a Shane McMahon style big long elbow drop right across the ring. But again, that didn't pan out for him. What was it going to take to put either of these men away? Ricochet then headed up top again and hit Dream with his own finisher, the big elbow drop from the top. But again, Velveteen Dream kicked out. Finally, the finish came when Ricochet headed up top again. It sounds like it's a repetitive match. It's not. The way I'm telling it isn't exactly how it went down. Everything made a lot more sense. They weren't just heading up top and trading big moves off the top rope. Everything made sense. Momentum was swinging back and forth in very convincing fashion. And eventually, Ricochet won with the 630 to the back of Velveteen Dream. He was lying on his front. And Ricochet picked up the pinfall. And I lost my Cultaholic Heavyweight Championship to Sam Driver as a result of that match. And in hindsight, it was a silly call by me to go for Velveteen Dream, because I think if Ricochet had lost the match, that would have cut off his momentum immediately, as he's the newer guy coming in NXT, whereas when Velveteen Dream loses, he can always bounce back from that because he's Velveteen Dream. He has supreme confidence in himself. But this was a very, very good match indeed. I think I do prefer it slightly to the opener, but it wasn't my favourite match on the show, and I'm sure you know, if you've watched it, what I am alluding to. Next up, the NXT Women's Championship match between the champion Shayna Baszler and the challenger Nikki Cross. Psychologically, this was one of the most interesting matches on the entire card because Nikki Cross had absolutely no fear in Shayna Baszler whatsoever, or no fear of Shayna Baszler. We've recently seen Shayna feud with Dakota Kai, a feud built on the very fact that Dakota was terrified of her opponent. In this case, it was the total opposite. Nikki Cross was not scared one bit, to the extent where before the first move of the match, when both people were just staring each other down, Nikki Cross went, "Go on, put the rear naked choke on me, see how that goes for you." Shayna went to do so, Nikki Cross was ready for it, rammed her into the turnbuckle, and the match was underway. And it was all about Nikki Cross not fearing Shayna Baszler at all and just tearing into her with that relentless fury that we all know her for. Shayna Baszler, of course, had the size advantage, the power advantage, and used that very much to gain a foothold in the match. Again, it wasn't one of the more unpredictable matches on the card. I think everyone kind of knew that Shayna Baszler was eventually going to win, especially with Sanity being called up to SmackDown. This could potentially be the exit for Nikki Cross out of NXT, and she could well join Sanity on SmackDown. The finish eventually came when Shayna did catch Nikki Cross in that rear naked choke after a pretty damn good match, and the way that Nikki lost was very cool. She didn't tap out because she's not really that sort of character. She's kind of a wild, yes, she's a babyface, sort of de facto babyface in this feud, but she was never the sort of wrestler who was gonna tap out. She actually passed out, and it was very creepy, but in a cool way. She was caught in the rear naked choke. She began to smile as though, like, kind of partially as though the oxygen was being cut off to her head, but also because she kind of just is a bit weird and a bit masochistic and probably enjoyed the pain a little bit. It was one of those weird moments, but it worked very well with either woman's respective character, and eventually the referee just waved off the match and went, "Look, she's passed out. Shayna Baszler, you have retained the NXT Women's Championship." Then, in the break between this match and the next one, we panned to ringside for a signature NXT new signing reveal, and it was none other than Keith Lee, the man of the hour, the king of the ring, intelligence and power. It was a very exciting moment indeed. Keith Lee has been one of the best indie wrestlers out there for the past year or two. He's very impressive indeed. He was doing great things in PWG, great things in Evolve, great things all over the place as well. He often came over to the UK independent scene and just tore it up every time he made an appearance. And now he is a member of the NXT roster. I would not be surprised at all to see him as a future NXT champion. I even wouldn't be surprised to see him some years down the line as a future WWE champion. That's how good he is, not just in the ring, but in terms of the way he carries himself and his excellent charisma. I'm very excited indeed. Next up, we had the NXT Championship match between Aleister Black, the champion, and Lars Sullivan. Now, this was an interesting one because I think, compared to the standard, the incredibly high bar set by the recent NXT Championship matches this year, this match fell a little bit short. Lars Sullivan was, of course, one of the least fancy challengers heading into an NXT title match that we've seen for quite some time. And of course, if you think back to the last two takeovers, the NXT Championship matches there really were phenomenal. We had in January, before the Royal Rumble, Gargano versus Almas, the first 5-star match in WWE since Punk versus Cena in 2011. Then, of course, in New Orleans, we had Aleister Black versus Andrade Almas, another wonderful match. This match wasn't quite as good. It was still okay, but it suffered from one or two little things. The main point of contention here was that, at one point, and it's sad to say because the match was, pretty damn good, but at one point, Aleister Black went for the Black Mass kick. Lars Sullivan had turned his back. He clipped him in the back of the head, but kind of missed him as well, and Sullivan sold it anyway, and we had a "you effed up" chant from the crowd. Now, that was very surprising to hear at a TakeOver show. Yes, the crowds are often very smarky, but they're often very forgiving as well. That wasn't the case in this match, and it did sort of affect the finish a little bit. But luckily, both guys kind of put it behind them, pulled it around, and really delivered a pretty damn good finish. Black went for the Black Mass kick again, and Lars Sullivan caught it, and then really swung the momentum back in his favour. At one stage, there was a very convincing near fall where it looked like Sullivan was going to be the next NXT champion, but then Aleister Black really regrouped himself, got it together, hit him with a Black Mass kick, and then did that slow raise with his foot, drilled him with another one while Sullivan was on his knees, and retained the NXT Championship. I struggle to see who is going to take that championship from Black. He could hold it for quite some time. And finally, the main event, the Chicago street fight between Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. Obviously, their match at NXT TakeOver New Orleans was one of the best of the year, one of the best WWE matches I can remember seeing ever. It was that good. And obviously back then, Gargano got the victory, but what would happen here? Would Gargano make it 2-0, or would Ciampa level the score, setting things up for a rubber match somewhere down the line? On his way to the ring, Gargano was stopped by his wife, Candice LeRae, and she gave him the broken crutch from the last match, the crutch that he couldn't bring himself to use on Ciampa, but this time she gave it to him and went, "Kick his ass." And these two men did kick each other's ass. It was uncomfortable to watch at times. It was a very, very brutal match. More brutal than we're used to seeing, certainly, in WWE. There was some really nasty spots. I'm going to run through them right now. Both men used various weapons in this match to batter the hell out of one another. There was Ciampa's crutch, there was Johnny Gargano's sort of sawn off crutch with the sharp end, there were chairs, there were trash cans, there were trash can lids. It was all very brutal indeed, and it looked like Gargano had the upper hand for much of the match, but Ciampa's expressions and his heelishness and his evilness were fully on point. At one stage, Gargano kicked out of a near fall, and Ciampa looked like, what the hell have I got to do to put this guy away? And that's when the match sort of flipped into storytelling overdrive. There were callbacks to their previous match, and then Ciampa went under the ring, pulled out a pair of bolt cutters, and started cutting the ring away. He rolled up one side of the canvas and exposed the wooden boards underneath, and it looked like something very nasty was going to happen. But nothing happened quite yet. He grabbed Johnny Gargano's sawn-off crutch, the half crutch, jammed him in the back of the head with it. Gargano went down and kicked out of the pinfall, and this sent Ciampa over the edge. He grabbed Gargano, took him up the ramp in a very clear callback to last year at NXT TakeOver, where the tag team DIY finally broke up. They were kind of limping down the ramp together in a very, very clear callback. Ciampa was giving him a little evil monologue all the way up, saying, this is what you did, it's not enough, it's never going to be enough, and all this sort of stuff. It was brilliant. It was really brilliant. It was some of the strongest imagery I've ever seen in professional wrestling. He then took him to the top of the ramp, mirrored the spot where he turned on him last year, hit the same knee, and then it looked like something truly bad was going to happen to Johnny Gargano. The pair headed up to the top of like a storage crate next to the production table, and it looked like a high spot was going to come and really nail Johnny Gargano. Ciampa then took off Gargano's wedding ring, spat on it, and threw it away, which was ridiculous. Then he looked like he was going to slam Gargano off the side through the production table, but Gargano reversed it into a cradle. I don't know the name of the move, but he cradled his head, jumped off, and hit like, you know what I mean, like sort of a back suplex kind of thing, like slash senton off the side of the storage thing through the production table. It was a heinous bump, and it looked for a moment like this would have been the end of the match. All kinds of stretcher bearers came out, they loaded Ciampa onto the stretcher, and they started to take him out of the arena, and Gargano was sat back on the top of the storage crate, looking at his finger and realizing that Ciampa had taken off his wedding ring, and he snapped. We thought he may have been turning heel. I'm not sure if that's the case, but he jumped down, punched some production guys, knocked the referee over, and dragged Ciampa back to the ring and looked to really punish him. He was slapping on the Gargano escape, he was hitting Ciampa with everything, and it looked like Ciampa was done. He handcuffed him, continued to batter him, slapped on the Gargano escape again. Ciampa was tapping out, but of course the referee had been knocked down at the top of the ramp. But at this stage, we weren't certain whether the match was over or not. Finally, Gargano was dragged off by like a team of like officials and suits from backstage. The referee went over to Ciampa to make sure he was okay. Of course, he wasn't okay. He was bleeding and a mess and everything. And then Gargano fought them off again, went back into the ring to truly finish Ciampa off once and for all. And then Ciampa struck. Gargano was on the apron, he looked to jump through onto Ciampa. Ciampa caught him in a DDT position and drilled his head into the exposed boards before, the ones that had been exposed earlier on in the match. Sort of flopped on him because he was still handcuffed, and the referee was back in the ring and counted the pinfall. Ciampa leveled up the score 1 each, and it was a sad ending to TakeOver, but what a phenomenal match. Instant Match of the Year candidate, of course. I'm not certain whether I prefer it to their first match or not, but it was definitely up there. One of the best matches of the year for certain, and quite a breathtaking amount of storytelling, all done very well. It wasn't just storytelling for the sake of it, every single thing made sense. And my recap of it, to be honest, hasn't done justice to all the little nuances throughout the match. I strongly suggest that you head onto the network and check this out for yourself. So with that was the end of a very impressive TakeOver. Not as strong a TakeOver, I will say, as the previous one, TakeOver New Orleans, which I think, for my money, may have been the best TakeOver ever, but certainly a very strong one indeed. The opening tag match was excellent. Dream versus Ricochet was wonderful. The main event was brutal and brilliant. The men's title match was a bit of a slight disappointment, but not fully. It was still okay. And the women's match was rife with fantastic psychology and all the rest of it. Lovely stuff, a very nice varied card. And once again, TakeOver has provided a ludicrously high bar for the following night's pay-per-view to follow. Good luck, Money in the Bank. All the best. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to do it. So that is what happened at NXT TakeOver Chicago. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com, and yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at JackTheJobber. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic and check out our Patreon as well, patreon.com/Cultaholic. And never forget, of course, to join us.